People who have legally killed someone in self-defense. What is your story? Please like, subscribe and comment so I can create more videos for you. My great uncle lived in a trailer in a rural area of Florida. A kid, 17, broke in one night and held him at knife point. He had no money, and told the kid that. He also told the kid to leave or he will grab the shotgun next to him. Kid charged and slashed him, then he shot him dead. They ended up charging his friend, driving getaway car, with the murder. Turns out they robbed several trailers that night. Chose the wrong one. Not that I rob people or anything, but what about a trailer park screams I have excess funds laying around? Not me but my aunt. About 2 years into her first marriage, her husband beat her black and blue one night. She didn't call the cops, didn't seek treatment, just went to bed and told him the next time he laid a hand on her she would kill him. About 6 months later, he did, so she did. He took a swing, broke 2 of her ribs. She grabbed a kitchen knife and shoved it into his eye. She called a friend who was a local sheriff's deputy, who told her to call 911 and then immediately call a lawyer. No charges. The broken ribs helped prove self-defense. Here we are 20 years later and that sheriff's deputy is now my Uncle Gary. We go hunting together every couple years when we can find time. My parents' story. During their wedding reception, 2 men with masks entered and announced they'd be robbing them. Everyone thought it was a prank, laughed it off, and went on with the party. They pulled out guns and said it was no joke. Everyone was on the ground on all fours, and they went around collecting wallets and jewelry from the guests. They came up to my grandpa, I've never met him, and saw what looked like a wallet in his breast pocket. It was a date book, and asked him to hand over his wallet. He said he didn't have one, 'cause he didn't, and was punched in the stomach. My uncle looked up at the guy and had a gun put to his forehead and was told, "I'm going to blow your fucking brains out." My uncle grabbed the gun and turned around, pulling the guy's face into his shoulder. My grandpa and others tackled him down and held him down. The second guy went running off, and my dad ran track on college, chased after him and tackles him. Him and others pin him down. Police come and everyone is excited that the ordeal is over. The cops say something like, "This is going to take a bit longer though, there was a death." Freaking out, my family asks who and find out the first guy was suffocated from being held down. Later it was confirmed he was on cocaine and died from something related to his heart. Edit. At first said ceremony meant reception. The cops say something like, "This is going to take a bit longer though, there was a death." Freaking out, my family asks who and find out the first guy was suffocated from being held down, crushed to death by your family's massive brass balls. This happened to my dad in Russia, back in the 90s, which were wild there. My dad is a big fat guy who can't fight for shit. He'd recently gotten an 8-month-old puppy, and he took the puppy for a walk. He was and still is a smoker of more cigarettes. I think they only exist in Europe. 2 young guys walk up to him and ask for a cigarette. He says he doesn't have any. Now that brand of cigarettes that he smokes, they are real long, and the pack is sticking out of his pocket. The young guys get pretty pissed and one of them shoves dad. When my dad falls down, the guys take out a telescopic truncheon. Dad knows it's a losing battle but he unclips the dog's leash so he could swing the metal clip at least. Now, there is one important fact that I left out about this puppy. He was a Caucasian sheepdog. At 8 months, he was about 75 pounds. And he went fucking ballistic. Both guys end up in ICU, one loses an eye. The cops want the dog killed, and Dad has to pay a lot of bribes to keep that from happening. The dog ends up living a nice happy 13 years. Here is one of me in this pup car. 1995. He was a big, brave boy. 7E37063 A0E34 4182 AFB 953245 A7F2 B2ing.com webpage. My mother had a friend who had an abusive husband. One day she showed up at our home, disheveled, distressed, red marks on her face and arms, crying about her husband going crazy. My mom of course is sympathetic, but 1, it's the middle of the day, and 2, She's alone with me and my younger brother and she doesn't want the drama. She tells her friend she'll call the police and asks over and over again, is he going to come here? Because I can't have that. My dad, who would have sent that arsehole to the moon, bang, zoom, at a moment's notice, was at work. Mom's friend assured her that he isn't because he doesn't know where she is and says not to call police because, as it went still goes, that will make it worse. Sure as shit not 10 minutes later there is an insane pounding on the front door and yelling. Hubby's come to collect the missus and he doesn't care that he's making a scene. Mom tells me to take my brother and lock ourselves in her bedroom, but the bedroom is right by the front door and there is a window so I can hear everything and I get full view of what happens next. After more screaming between hubby and wife, and my mom, he throws his shoulder into the door. My mom has decided she's had it. Right before he goes to shoulder the door again, it flies open and out comes my mother, swinging a baseball bat as hard as she can. She got few hits to the asshole's arms and one to his back which sent him tumbling off the porch and into the grass. All the while she's cursing and threatening him, swinging the bat in the air like a lunatic. Think Shelley Duvall in The Shining but with 1000% more profanity and a more controlled aim. My mother is 4 feet 10. If she weighed 100 pounds at the time she weighed a lot. I doubt she did any real damage but the shock of it made him scramble to his feet and haul us down the block. He did not come back thankfully. But of course, as things went, and as they still go, Mom's friend went back to the arsehole after a short cooling off period. Thankfully she was able to finally get away, and the arsehole is rarely mentioned now but the story does come up occasionally when my mom and her friends have too many Bloody Marys over brunch. It seriously is one of my mom's proudest moments, haha. Obligatory not me, but my grandpa, but here goes. Grandpa was something else. Arrested several times during Prohibition for running stills in the hills of Appalachia and other colorful sorts of stuff. Anyway, many years after that, he was in a bar somewhere in town. Some young arsehole got in his face, as young arseholes do. Words were exchanged, the young guy pulled out a gun, and he stuck it in my grandpa's face. Grandpa didn't have time to determine the extent of the young man's commitment to his actions, so he decided to pull out his gun and kill him right there. Cops were called, witnesses were interviewed, and Grandpa was free to go. Grandpa didn't have time to determine the extent of the young man's commitment to his actions. I read this in the best narrator's voice and your grandpa is brilliant. I was working as a bouncer at a gay bar downtown. Had this drunk skip out on his tab at another bar and they called our bar to warn us. Sure enough, he was sitting in one of our booths just kind of existing. Manager that night tells me to haul his ass out because he's not welcome, so I do. He then stands outside the door I'm working just non-stop yelling next to me, constantly poking at me and insulting me and kicking my ankles, dumb childish shit. At one point he grabbed the cord for my earpiece by my collar and snapped it, so he got a solid boot to the balls and dropped to his knee for a minute or two, then went back to being a complete and utter dildo like he had been. I am very patient. He was annoying but I have a little brother and lots of younger cousins so he was no worse than what I had growing up. This lasted a good half hour or so before out of nowhere while I'm checking IDs I feel hands around my throat and they start to squeeze. Didn't even think. Just spun around, swung at face height, popping him solidly in the mouth and grabbed him by the hair and bounced his face off the brick wall next to me. 4 or 5 guys who were watching the whole thing grabbed him and he's just standing there still throwing insults at all of us in a complete drunken state, blood running from his face, and like a gift from above a police cruiser does a roll by and I flagged him down real fast. Cop gets out, asks what's going on, I give him a quick rundown. He asks what happened to the guy's face. I told him I punched him and bounced him off the wall after he grabbed my throat. Cop cuffs and stuffs him and I never saw him darkening our doorway again. I'd like to think he sobered up in the drunk tank and reassessed his life, but he probably just went to be obnoxious at a bar without a doorman. Not me, but my dad had to knock someone out with a pipe wrench. My dad was in his mid-20s and had just started up his HVAC company. It was late at night. One of his customers called about his tenants complaining the air was out. At 3 a.m. My dad, as a recent business startup all on his own, got dressed and went out on the call. He got there and fixed the AC, and when he was leaving, it was a bit of a rundown, poverty-stricken area. A man who was clearly drunk thought he was with his girlfriend who was living in the house my dad just worked on. My dad, obviously, was like, "No, I'm the HVAC repair guy." Dude pulls out a knife and charges my dad, and my dad simply swings at him with what was in his hand, which was a wrench. Knocked the guy in the temple and he was out cold. Dad kinda panicked and jumped into his van and sped off. Nothing ever came of it, so I assume the guy was okay, aside from a massive headache. Years ago I was plumbing for one of those service companies, kind of like Roto-Rooter. Got a call at midnight because an entire apartment building had a main line, sewer, backup. No problem, easy fix, just pop the clean out, run the cable down until they get flow, easy peasy, right? Number. Saw the address was in a sketchy part of town. Drove down there in my little work truck. Started walking up the main walkway with my clipboard containing the contract I'd need signed by management. I hear yelling and look up. Dozens of people hanging out of their windows yelling at me. Thank God they yelled because it enabled me to see and dodge the half dozen or so beer bottles being thrown at me. As I was speed walking back to my truck, the building manager comes out and starts yelling at them that I'm there to fix their plumbing. He then turns to me and says, "It's okay, you can come in now." I noped out. Hell no, they want to do that shit, they can sit in their own shit. I'm a medic and firefighter. We got called to a rollover accident New Year's morning. Obviously a drunk driver. It was 3 AM. We were first on scene, walked up to the car, and found a gun pointed at my face. I grabbed his arm, smashed it into the A-post repeatedly. My partner didn't even know what was going on. The guy dropped the gun. I told me partner to get it, and I ripped the guy from the car. He's screaming I broke his arm. The police get there, I tell them he had a gun and pulled it on me. They grab him and throw him in their car. He was arrested, taken to the hospital so his arm could be splintered. Was charged with driving impaired and assault. Plead guilty and went to jail for a couple of years. That sounds like a winner. Hey, let's pull a gun on a person who's supposed to be saving my life. Not me but my grandpa. When he lived in Mexico he owned this one ranch where during the day he had workers to maintain it because it was really big space and there was lots of cattle, horses etc. Anyway, one night he decided to stay and sleep at the main house in the ranch. He has his main house an hour away closer to the city and has his sister maintain the ranch house. Right before he went to bed someone snuck onto the property, before he decided to get alarms and other security systems, and the man tried to steal some of the money in the main house that he knew was there because he was friends with one of the workers and was working with him to try and keep the money. He sneaks on and my grandpa was still awake about to go to bed and he sees him from the second story window creeping up to the house and sees an object in his hands. My grandpa goes and grabs his shotgun and goes to the front porch and yells at him and he just charged. My grandpa aimed the gun at shot him in the chest. He also ended up firing the worker he found out was working with him. Granddad was in the Navy stationed in Panama after WWII. One day, he and one of his shipmates were out patrolling or on guard duty or some such when a local kid runs up and says there's an American in a bar nearby and he's about to get killed. So my granddad and his comrade follow the kid to the bar and walk in to see an American sailor all cut up, backed into a corner holding a chair over his head, surrounded by a couple of locals with knives. Granddad scans the room and sees a pair of Panamanian cops in uniform sitting at a nearby table just watching and laughing. He tells the guys with the knives to back off and one of them turns and lunges at him, so he shoots him in the belly. Immediately, the cops jump up reaching for their sidearms, but Granddad's buddy shoots them both right around the same time Granddad shoots the second knife, wielding attacker. So maybe 30 seconds after they walked into the bar, 4 guys are dead. They got caught, Marshy yelled but somehow came out without so much as a discharge. Not sure how or why. I need to get around to seeing if I can find any records on it. Also, my granddad never met a story he couldn't embellish, but I have a feeling this one is true. He'd talk about horrific violence he experienced at Iwo Jima till the cows came home. but he did not want to talk about Panama. I've posted this as a comment on another AskReddit before, so copy paste. My 18-year-old brother and his, then, 18-year-old wife lived next door to a family with a teenage son. She started an affair with that 17-year-old son. One day, the son barged into my brother's place and started attacking him. My brother was packing and moving BC. He was leaving for the army. He had pulled down a metal pole in a closet to make room for boxes. My brother grabbed that pole and used it to fight off the teen. The kid ran out bleeding. My brother called my dad. We lived a few blocks down the street, and my dad jumped into action. He grabbed one of his hunting shotguns and some bird ammo. He ran out the door to the car screaming for us to call 911. My mom and I ran after him. BC, we were clueless and wanted to see where he was headed. My mom was on the phone with the cop and they were dispatching the one cop that we had in our town. We start running down the road to my brother's place. BC, we saw dad pull in. As we get near, we hear a gunshot and see my dad and brother taking cover behind the car doors they'd opened to climb in and leave. Another shot goes off and we can see it isn't my dad firing. The teen had run home next door and was bleeding and told his dad my brother was trying to kill him. His dad grabbed his handgun and saw my dad and brother leaving and started shooting. That's the gunfire mom and I heard. Dumbass kept running towards my dad's car. I saw my dad position his shotgun in the car window and fire one round. Then, he and my brother climbed in the car and started driving back at us home. We all finally get together and dad says he shot the man in the stomach. Chaos breaks out on our street. Ambulance, cops, and people. They take the other dad away to the hospital and my dad into custody. Within hours, we find out that the man has died. The bird shot hit his liver and he bled out. My dad was charged with murder and we started receiving death threats. In the cover of night, we are moved. We hid for days until my dad was bonded out. Ended up moving far away. Grand jury was convened and I had to testify to what I saw. After all the evidence and testimony were presented, my father wasn't charged. BC, the grand jury decided it was self-defense. I now have contact with some friends from that town BC off social media. We never talk about what happened or anything. Things carry on as normal. That day's forever burned into my memory. Why is your dad's initial reaction to grab a shotgun and ammo? I don't think I've ever heard of a reaction to a fist fight to bring a gun over. Must have been in a very shit neighborhood for the reactions on both fathers' parts. A tiny girl I went to school with was at home with her mother-in-law. A man came and knocked on the door with some bullshit excuse like his car was broken down or something. He eventually left. Her husband took his truck into the shop that day and came home later. That night, the same man broke into their house thinking it was only the two women home, as no other cars had returned. Her husband began struggling with the intruder and broke a wooden baseball bat over the guy's head. He kept attacked. Mother-in-law jumps in. Tiny woman ran to the kitchen and got a knife and stabbed the man to death, stabbing multiple times. The man was high on PCP or something. Edit. Okay, so I was a little off on the story, but close enough. This mentions things that I wasn't correct on, but I also mention things the story did not. Whether my details are 100% accurate or not, probably not because I came from a small gossipy town, but here, Wash Mom defends family against intruder. Photo 9. Pictures, CBS News webpage, and here, HuffPost webpage. It's ridiculous what PCP can do. You could be kicked in the balls and not feel a thing. Not me, but my father. Back in the 60s, he was at a small town bar with a friend. The friend was playing pool and won a bunch of money off some guy he'd just met. So the guy goes out to the car, gets a gun and kills my dad's friend. Everyone in the bar kind of jumped on the gunman, and my dad stomped his head with his steel-toed work boots. The guy died in the hospital, but my dad was never arrested or charged with anything. He doesn't talk about it much. The only reason he told me was because I made a stupid joke about shooting someone and he wanted to teach me why it wasn't funny. I can't even imagine that. You're just out at a bar and you're willing to just kill someone over a pool game. Then you end up just dying yourself. You hear the term senseless violence, but this really brings it home. The whole thing could have literally been avoided if he had just accepted losing the money. Yes, a number. Had a drunk guy chase me to my car and punch me in the mouth so hard my teeth punctured my cheek. I ended up breaking the guy's jaw, so I was the one charged because I didn't have any actual damage and he had a broken bone. I was charged with aggravated assault and ended up taking something like a plea bargain to avoid both going to trial and having a violent crime on my record. If there had been a camera in the parking lot, it would have been obviously a case of self-defense, but it was my word against it and he had hospital bills to prove it. Ugh, that fucking sucks to hear such injustice. Hopefully karma gets him one day. I'm just picturing St. Peter socking him one at the gates to heaven and he passes out and falls down to where he belongs, presumably. I was living in Queens while attending Fordham U in the Bronx. Came off the train one night. There was a young busker at the end of the platform rapping about how if everyone just gave a little money, God would give a little back. I looked straight ahead, ignored him, tried to power walk past him. I'm a small female. He was a much bigger man. He grabbed me by the arm and started trying to charm me for money. I was pulling away, trying to make him let go. He wouldn't. I started screaming and then I just started stabbing him with my keys. I always carried my keys with the tips stuck out between my fingers because it was a not so nice neighborhood and I always got home late. It didn't kill him, but it hurt enough that he let me go. This little immigrant woman had been coming up the platform and heard me screaming, so she came running and started hitting him with umbrella. So now he's on the ground bleeding and being sacked about his personage by a 75-year-old Ukrainian woman who introduced herself to me as Olga. Police came, arrested him, gave me and my new friend a pat on the back and a ride home. And X200B. Fortunately, it was the only time I was ever assaulted when I lived in Queens. When I lived near campus in the Bronx, it was a lot worse. My roommate was insane. I dated the wrong girl years ago in high school. After we broke up, she said I hit her. Just so we are clear, I didn't. A couple of guys, including her new BF, came up to me and sucker punched me as I walked by. At the time I was figuring competitively in Thai boxing but not talking about it much. I cracked 6 of one of the guy's ribs. It was all on camera and I promised to not press charges if they didn't. My punishment, as it happened on school property, was that I had to go say sorry to him at the hospital. My smug ass words exactly were, "I'm sorry I cracked your ribs after you and your friend punched me." I'm sorry, mate. I married the wrong girl. Long story short, she cheats on me and takes my baby girl to another country illegally. I was stupid enough to fall into a trap, as it became clear if I ever wanted to see my daughter I had to go visit her. She tells me that if I ever go visit my daughter she will call the police on me and tell them I hit her. So, I video chat my daughter now from time to time. She's a teenager now, but she robbed me of my relationship with my daughter. She ended up even being a crappy mother from what my daughter tells me. My grandpa was a cop very briefly in his 20s. He quit after an incident, either a group prison break or a group escaping a police van, something to that degree, involving a massive shootout. He killed a couple men, while basically half the small town police force was wiped out. It traumatized him to the degree that he won't talk about the incident or acknowledge his old co-workers. And while she didn't get away with it, I still think her story is a good, interesting one. A female family member of mine tortured and killed a sex offender. She was molested as a child, and the cycle continued when her husband molested their children. After the divorce, she gave custody to her grandma for seemingly no reason, then went on to break into a man's house and mutilate him, before ultimately shooting him. I'm not sure how long she's going to be in prison, but she was arrested when I was a little kid. Yeah, she probably shouldn't have done that. But I probably wouldn't have stopped her. When I was 22, I was at a show at a bar, watching my friend's band play. After they finished their set, I moved to the back to be near the doors to help them with moving their equipment out. It's very dark and everyone else is still up closer to the stage. Suddenly, someone I don't know grabs me from behind, in a big bear hug, and starts to drag me back towards the doors leading out. I, without thinking at all, drop my weight, manage to slip out of his arms, whirl around, grab his hair and slam his face down into my rising knee. I can still to this day feel his nose shatter as I hit him. He stumbles backwards, blinded and covered in blood. He's rather quickly grabbed by my friends who had seen him attack me, and the cops are called. He's arrested and taken to the hospital, where it turns out I broke not only his nose, but also fractured his cheekbone. For context, I'm a girl, and around 110 pounds. I've never been in a fight or have any real idea how to defend myself. I'm certain the only reason this worked is that he hadn't expected me to defend myself in any way. It was entirely the surprise of it. I don't think it would have worked at all had he been prepared. Edit for structure. First of all, kudos. That's awesome, especially the dropping your weight thing. If you had kept your muscles tensed, it would have made it easier for him to keep dragging you. Secondly, what the actual fuck is up with these fucking idiots asking why he did that? It doesn't matter. Who would think there's a reasonable explanation for grabbing a small woman you've never met and who has never met you and dragging her out of a building? Was a heavy piece of equipment about to fall on her? No. Was the building on fire? No. Okay, then. He got what he deserved. Heck, it doesn't matter who he picked up, that's what he would have deserved. Obligatory not me but somebody I knew. My cousin killed her ex-boyfriend because he was abusive to her son. I only met her once or twice, all before this event took place. If my memory serves, she was former Army or Marine Corps, and saw some action in the Middle East. She was a very small lady, maybe 5'1" or 5'2". But she was tough. She bear hugged me and picked me up off my feet the first time I met her. I would have been 6'2", 150 pounds. I was tall at a young age. Anyway, context aside, she had to kill her ex-boyfriend. She was a gun owner, and I guess one night he was trying to break in, ended up successfully getting in, and she plugged him full of holes. They brought her into custody just for the preliminary investigation, but it wrapped up pretty quickly because it was pretty cut and dry that she was defending herself. I haven't seen her since, and I have heard very little about it after this happened maybe 4 years ago. That's the story. Not very climactic, but enjoy anyway. Was this up in Montana? We had a highly similar case here at the police station I work at. We just held her for a few hours to make sure nothing was premeditated. It clearly wasn't, so we put her and her kids to a hotel until some relatives could come pick them up. I've told this a few times, but it's the only answer I got for threads like these. TL. Doctor, I got someone's babidaddy arrested because I refused to deliver to a specific part of town, as I kept getting mugged, and since I was the only one stupid enough to keep going, I decided enough was enough, and he tried to follow me home to kill me, hurt me. He got arrested for outstanding warrants and I went along with my life. Then some girl comes to my door asking if she could borrow my corkscrew for her wine. I assumed she was my neighbor, and since I didn't want her running off with my corkscrew, as it was in this weird multi-tool my dad made me, I just took the wine bottle and walked to my kitchen. I heard the sound of a pocket knife and turned around. She starts shooting off about how she's going to kill me for getting her source of money arrested. I had a real bad day and was just tired, so I conked her upside the head and she crumpled to the ground. I call the police and an ambulance and tell them what happened. I get arrested since they can't verify what happened, but I was released not long after because I knew all the cops. I wasn't on drugs, and plus my neighbor's security camera caught her pulling out the knife and approaching me, so it was enough for them to go, yeah, checks out. Don't know what happened to her though, but I stopped caring. I love how casual this is. Just really had a long day and she pulled a knife on me, so bop she down, called police and chilled. This is only legal because they were both 9, but I'll tell the story if my sister. Some little boy was threatening to kick her in her private parts over and over at lunch. So what does she do? Tell a teacher. Leave. Ignore him. Nope. God bless her, she picks up a pencil and stabs this kid in the thigh. We are talking full, she let go and it's still stuck in his flesh stab. My parents had no idea how to deal with it because she felt seriously threatened and was, in some capacity, defending herself, but obviously they can't have a 9-year-old stabbing people. In the end, they both had to write apology letters, Sister was suspended for a day, I think. A few of my friends got her some sweets and told her always stand up to boys doing stuff you don't want. Just don't stab them. She's now 12 and in the gifted program with a few social problems, but otherwise, a happy kid. My civics teacher who lived in a smaller Texas town told me a crazy story from his childhood. When he was a kid, a robber broke into his house and was stealing shit from his family. He woke up and looked around the house due to the noise. He found the robber standing in his foyer, about to exit, and the next thing he knew, the robber's head exploded. His father, who was upstairs, got his revolver, shot the robber's head, who met the hammer of justice of the form of a .44 Magnum. That was that. Robber gone, and no legal consequences faced the family. Due to Texas laws concerning protecting your property, this occurred way long ago, so laws may be different. He used this story to explain the kinds of laws the US and Texas had. Pretty insane story. Moral of the story: if you rob someone, and they have a gun and they know how to use it, prepare to say goodbye to your way of life, or your mortal coil. Especially in Texas. And X200B, edit, this would have happened in 1960s 1970s in small town Texas. Even in this day and age, someone who breaks into homes at night instead of during the day is often given less leniency because you should expect the home to be occupied at that time. Obligatory school story, with no idea if it counts. And X200B, in 7th grade, there was this quite large fella that liked to push me around and punch me unprovoked and for absolutely no reason. One day, I snapped at him, cussing him out and punching him. Of course, him being larger than me, I immediately take off towards the bathrooms and hold the door, expecting him to try and enter. And X200B, nope, he holds the door so that I cannot get out. We stay like that for a few minutes, but by perfect timing, in an attempt to get out I kick the door just as he lets up. He got knocked out clean, dropped on the floor and had to be carried to the cafeteria. And X200B, he spent about 2 weeks in hospital after that. I didn't get into trouble because of what he had done to me before. My proudest childhood moment. On the flip side, I was a big kid in middle school, easily 2 feet taller than everybody else and a fair amount heavier than most of the rail thin kids. One kid I knew and was friendly with developed a habit of hitting me initially in a playful way, but then later I think it was more of a way to vent or something. He'd make a joke and then hit my lightly initially, but as time went on the punch became a separate thing. He'd stow it harder and harder every time, multiple times a day, and eventually I'd had enough. Shit hurt. So one day he hit me in the arm as hard as he could while we were walking down the hall, and I stopped cold and picked him up by his throat and told him to stop for the last time. He did, and I felt like Hercules. Another story, back in high school I was in facs, read home ec, and another scrawny kid was having fun hitting the Jolly Green Giant. I like broccoli, sue me. He socked me in the kidney, so I said fuck it and nailed him in the kidney, an eye for an eye and all that. He nearly passed out. Cue immediate regret. I was trying to send a message, not fuck him up. I supported his weight so he didn't crack open his head or anything, and that was the last time he hit me. As a big guy I was taught be meek, don't abuse your size or strength. You know, good old Uncle Ben shit. Well, it turns out kids will get away with as much as they can, and until they find out what they can't they'll keep going. In high school, 2 wannabe thugs tried robbing me in the locker room after gym. I had to poop beforehand, so I was the last one in the locker room. Dart. One of them tried to grab me and I instinctively swung and completely shattered his jaw. He was bleeding everywhere and the other guy was kind of stunned, so I sprinted out and found the teacher. I told him what happened and he went in to check on the other kid. They tried telling the resource officer that I had randomly assaulted the kid for no reason. I told him the truth. Both kids had a super extensive history of being pieces of shit and I had never been in trouble at school. My word versus theirs, and they took mine. Kid went to the hospital and had to have some kind of surgery. I saw both of them in passing up until graduation, but nothing else ever happened or came of it. Last I saw on Facebook, they tried to rob a house together. One kid was shot and killed by the homeowner, the other is doing a shit ton of time in prison because he fled. but had left his cell phone in the dead friend's car they took there and had parked in front of the house they were robbing. Of course on his phone was all sorts of incriminating evidence. I don't really get it. I didn't grow up in a rough town or a town that had a lot of crime violence. But I can't speak on others' life situation. They could have had some inner demons that they never found help for, if they even looked. Or they could have just been two idiots who watched Boys in the Hood too many times. Well, as a kid my mom was in a lot of abusive relationships. When I was 12 she met a guy that was more violent than the last ones. Came one night where he was threatening to kill me and my mom. He had a shotgun and I believed he would shoot us. I did the only thing I knew to do. I found my target pistol and shot him twice. He fell immediately and died later the next day. I believed I had committed no crime. But the state gave me 4 years for it. I've been out a while now. I'm 20 and life is pretty normal. I was diagnosed with PTSD after that, but the symptoms have faded mostly. I find myself upset sometimes that I missed most of my childhood. But what can you do? This situation has made me fearful if I ever need to defend myself again since I was charged the first time. February 2017. My now ex-wife in South Carolina assaulted me, punched me in the head, chest and arms. She was high and trying to get me to fight her so that she could call the police as a domestic abuse case. I recorded everything on my iPhone and did not fight back. I was cornered in a bedroom and could not get away. I was told by the York County Police and my attorney that I am fortunate she did not press charges for hurting her fist on my jaw. This hits too close to home. My brother's wife shot and killed him, supposedly in self-defense. They were avid gun owners, very right-wing, religious people. They had been married 20 years. There had never been an allegation of abuse, never a call to the police, zero evidence that they were not the perfect couple. She was initially charged with murder, but the charges were eventually dropped, as the prosecutor got spooked by stories from other jurisdictions of women getting away with claiming self-defense, and I suppose he didn't want the loss on his record. What really hurts is that my sister-in-law never had to get on the stand or defend herself or tell her story in public, other than to hire an expensive attorney who intimidated her. The icing on the cake is that she collected all of my brother's life insurance and was able to have him cremated all while she was in jail. It was 12 years ago, and to this day I have no idea where his ashes are. That sucks because he was a veteran who wanted to be buried at Arlington. And X200B, edit. Thanks to all the kind commenters and for the suggestions about getting a headstone in Arlington, or another national cemetery. I just wanted to let you know that I have contacted the US Navy and am now in the process of requesting Mike's DD-214. Apparently it takes up to 90 days to process my request, but that's the first step in the process. I can't believe that no one in my family ever thought of doing this before. Thank you all. I know it's been 12 years, but I'm sorry for your loss. It gets easier but it is never easier. Growing up biracial in rural Louisiana, I had to deal with my share of racism from both prominent groups. After I started getting college programs looking at me for athletics, a lot of the establishment in that shithole started getting jealous, trying to derail me getting out of there. And X200B, after Rivals magazine put me in the top 100 recruits in the country, the focus became almost fanatical. I couldn't go anywhere without people wanting to give me things, advice, wanting me to buy them stuff when I made it pro. I had someone who was claiming to be my dad's cousin brokering deals with people to get shit in my name. During my senior year playoffs, I suffered a career-ending knee injury where my patella was torn and dropped down my leg during a dirty hit. And X200B, well, the promise of a college pro career disappeared overnight and I lost my love for the game afterwards. I realized then that these schools didn't give a shit about me and only wanted me for my body instead of my mind. I joined the army. Not because they gave a shit about me. I joined because I wanted to challenge myself and get an education, which the army provided. And X200B, when it was announced at HS graduation, people booed at me. Said I turned my back on the community and that I owed people who stuck their neck out for me. I went all white, became an Uncle Tom, etc. The black community called my mother a white bitch, etc. And X200B, at one of the HS graduation parties, dad's cousin got all pissed off and just berated me over and over again about it. I finally had enough and told him to back off in my colorful language. He slapped me and the fight was on, and after I floored his ass with a suplex he pulled a knife on me and cut my right arm pretty deep. The sight of blood, the Uncle Toms, all of that made me lose it, and I tackled him and took a rock and smashed the left side of his face in. He didn't die, but he never walked again. Police were called, I was arrested and charged with attempted manslaughter. And X200B, the only thing that saved me was my recruiter. My dad, former military, contacted him and told him what happened. Recruiter bailed me out and somehow charges were dropped. It's not on my record and no mention of it ever occurred at MEPS Basic 8. I stayed with the holdovers for 3 months until my basic started. I'll never forget going through MEPS that fast and was on a plane to Benning that same day. I never saw my recruiter again, and to this day, I would shake his hand and tell him he saved my life. And X200B, edit, so many replies, overwhelming positive. Some negative and all from Europeans or white liberals, that isn't a shock. And X200B, just for your information, my oldest sister had it harder than I did. My sister had the dedication and the athletics. I just gave 60-70% effort and coasted on my genes. And X200B. That's one hell of a recruiter. I love hearing stories of people helping like that. Glad you made it. Hope the army is treating you well. Say hi to my brother-in-law. My second cousin had told his dad if he ever hit his mom again he'd kill him. He got a call while in college from his mom. She was crying and couldn't make coherent sentences. So he took a vacation home to see her. His dad came in drunk and not knowing he was there and started beating her for whatever fucking reason. My cousin grabbed his shotgun, placed it beneath his dad's jaw while he hit his mom and pulled the trigger. It never went to trial. He was never even charged. Gotta love small town justice in the 60s. I've mentioned this before, so I'm going to combine a few posts on it in order to be a bit thorough. TL. Dr. Meth Head broke into my home with a bat, shot him 3 times, 1 miss, he died on the front lawn. It's hard because I don't have a vivid memory of every second. It's not like time slowed down, it was more rapid read react. The adrenaline hits and it gets patchy, it's more a series of pictures than a flowing memory for me. Loud crash and splintered wood sound get my gun, check the hallway. Door frame is smashed here, intruder in room, only way in or out is to hallway I am now covering. I was the only one home. Stay quiet, wait for intruder, see intruder come into hallway, shoot twice, intruder still standing but clearly staggered, fire 3rd shot and 4th shot, intruder staggers out doorway, collapses in yard, call the police, police arrive and take me in for questioning after surveying scene and roping it off, intruder is dead from 3 GSWs. 1 of my shots missed. Do I feel bad about it? Yes and number. I feel bad that he put me in that situation. I feel bad that his life events led him to use meth, and led him to believe attacking someone's home was a good idea. I do not feel bad about shooting him. He broke into my home. I wasn't about to ask him politely what he was there for and if he would mind waiting 20+ minutes for the police to arrive. Nor do I feel bad about killing him. If you ever draw your gun, you need to be committed to ending the threat. You cannot shoot for the knee, this isn't Hollywood. You shoot center mass, and that's where a lot of vital organs are. What would I have done differently? The main thing I would do differently is I didn't clear my house afterward. I was a bit in shock that I had just shot someone, and I waited in my one room, where the intruder had been since it only has one approach, pulled back the curtains and waited for the police to arrive. Looking back, I definitely should have cleared the house as I didn't know if there were more than one guy, but in the moment it just didn't occur to me. What were the police like? I mainly dealt with an investigator. He talked with me for about 20 minutes, not about the events, just about shit in general, who I was, what I did for work, what I like to do in my free time. He was just trying to calm me down. He eventually got around to discussing what happened. Told me that he had a sure idea of what happened, but had to follow protocol, so he told me I had a choice. I could voluntarily get in the back of his car, go down to the station with him, and voluntarily submit to questioning. or it could not be voluntary. I called my lawyer. He met me at the PD. I was questioned about the events, answered them, and was told I was free to go. They were filing no charges against me as they were satisfied that I had acted within my rights. How has it changed me psychologically? It really hasn't for the most part. Every now and then I'll think about it and be a little stunned. I killed another person. It's not a feeling that ever truly goes away. And I don't think it's ever something I'll fully get used to, but it is something I have fully accepted and do not feel guilty over. It's just kind of something that's always going to be there. Why did you have to shoot him? Why couldn't you just, 1. Run away and turn my back on an attacker whom I don't know is armed or not, or how fast he is? Smart. 2. Call the police, see their response time of 20+ minutes. 3. Hide. Tell you what, let's play hide and seek. If I find you, I start beating on you with a baseball bat. Want to bet you can hide well enough for 20+ minutes? 4. Give him what he wants. I don't know what he wants. And I'm not about to ask him to sit down for tea and discuss. Compliance does not guarantee safety. YouTube web page. It just puts you 100% at their mercy. Did you speak to the cops at all before your lawyer? I've always heard not to, even in these situations. Best only say you feared for your life and too shaken to talk. When I was in middle school, my mother started dating a guy she met at work. We eventually moved in with him from our nice suburban apartment to a shitty townhouse in inner city Baltimore. He got really abusive and would berate us and his 2 kids constantly. Eventually we decided to leave, and when my mom told him we were leaving, her pinned her down to the couch and while foaming at the mouth told her to stay and that he'd do horrible things if we left. I saw this happen and grabbed this heavy cast iron decoration in the living room and bashed his head with it 2 or 3 times. He fell off of her and was kind of shaking on the floor, so we left and came back with the cops to get our things. After living on the street for a while and eventually finding a place, we learned that his ex-wife moved back in with him and he raped 2 of his teenage daughters. He's currently in prison and I was very tempted to try and write a letter that would let his new friends know he was a chomo, but I didn't know how to do it. TLDR, guy tries to hurt my mom. So I caved his skull and I sleep like a baby at night. Don't fuck with moms. I was a Marine infantryman. In Afghanistan I was on patrol through some farmland. We passed a pair of building complexes and some guy strolled out around the corner with an AK-47 about 200 meters away. From the look on his face he had no idea we were there, so we kinda gawked at each other for a second. Then he ripped off a mag and I threw myself prone and did the same. I think I hit him at least twice, possibly 3 or 4 times, and he went down on his ass. While I was reloading, some guy ran out of the building and dragged him inside. We started taking fire from another direction and we never got around to pursuit, so no idea if he died or not. Probably. The Taliban don't really have a ton of access to modern medicine, but he was still sitting upright and coughing blood when he got dragged off, so who knows for sure. If all of the Marines and former Marines posted their stories in here, I'm sure we'd have one hell of an interesting thread. Glad you made it back. In college, a guy on my dorm floor broke the jaw of another person in town, not a student, who was trying to rob him as he walked home tipsy from the bar. Cops came. They let the guy I knew go after taking him into the station to get his info and the story. They had to take the mugger to the hospital for medical attention. Nothing happened to the guy I knew, and when he told the story he was very scared he would get in trouble for underage drinking with his friends. One thing people should know about punching another person in the face is your hand can swell up pretty badly too. And of course, being in the dorms, no one had I saw like a frozen bag of vegetables to help with the swelling. He was walking around holding cold water bottles to his hand to stop it from hurting. My granny did. The story I was told growing up was that a man came to fight my dad when he was a teen for sleeping with the man's then girlfriend. The man followed my dad home and tried to force his way into the home to get to my dad. My granny then allegedly shot the man point blank in the chest with a shotgun of some caliber using rock salt as ammunition. Clear-cut self-defense. Man survived and left my dad alone ever since. The end. What I pieced together as I got older was a different story that no one will confirm or deny to me. Yes, the man followed my dad, and yes, he did try to get my dad to come out of the house. However, he never forced his way in. He was told to leave, and when he refused, my granny returned with a shotgun and shot him point blank in the chest with a scatter shot. Is that the right way to describe that? The one with all the tiny pellets and stuff. From the way my aunt spoke of it, the man died, and due to loosely written laws at that time in the South, it was considered self-defense since the man would not leave my granny's porch despite a verbal warning. I don't know which version of the story is true, but I do know my granny did shoot a man on her porch. She kept a newspaper clipping hung in a frame in her bedroom and would happily tell the story of how she saved her son's life. My dad also confirms that she did shoot a man in his defense. He never told me which ending was the real ending though. Do you have any idea what a Cubiton is? Back in 2012, my friend and I was finishing the last trek of our 5-mile run. I sprinted for 1.5 minutes and failed to notice my friend stopped to take a breather. I was about 1,000 feet ahead of him when suddenly someone pulled a knife and demanded my iPhone. My Cubiton is always exposed on the bottom end of my water backpack. I said, no. He lunged at me. I detached the Cubiton, deflect knife, one jab into his left elbow and another one under the hinge of his left jaw. This Cubiton wasn't the straight block looking plastic, it was rather a jagged edge of aircraft grade aluminum, enough to be glass breakers. My friend sprinted to my location, the guy writhing in agony. We called the police, explained he may need an ambulance. A deputy said that the mugger was a repeat offender, possibly mugged 2 couples previously in the week. While the deputy was talking to us, he was still screaming and grunting. Then all of a sudden, we heard a crackled pop, followed by a louder scream, and according to the paramedics, his left jaw unhinged. About a month or so after this, he tried to sue me for excessive force. However, the judge tossed the case out when folks identified the guy and the police found his stash of goods in his bedroom. Mid-2012 was a crazy time. Here's 2 examples. The pointier one is a last resort. Cubitons, Marjorie say our webpage. 4 guys stepped into a crosswalk as I was driving through a high crime area that had been having a lot of carjacking. One happened to turn far enough to his side that I saw the gun in his hand behind his back. I floored it. All but one guy got out of the way. I clipped his hip and sent him tumbling. I kept going. So, not sure of his injuries. I saw him bounce back up and walk around, but could have been shock fueling that as it left a decent dent in my car. My ex-boyfriend killed someone in self-defense. We had dated when we were 15 briefly. At the time of this event, we were 18 and both dating new people, and I was currently in university away from home, and he was doing an extra year of high school. I got a phone call from my mom one day, and she told me a stabbing had happened at my old high school. She said the boy who did it was in my grade. When she told me his name and asked if I knew him, my jaw just about hit the floor. I didn't tell her we dated, since I didn't know the story yet, and just said we had some classes together. We hadn't been in contact since I had left for university. The original story I heard was that he stabbed a 19-year-old black man outside our high school, after school hours. He was white, and although he had made racist jokes in the past, there was no malice behind it, and he was a very sweet kid. A few days later, he was released from police custody and there was an outdoor from the local black community about how he was getting away with murder. People protested when he was released. The press was involved. Articles written with statements from the victim's family about how great their son was and what a terrible racist my ex was. It didn't help that he dressed in all black and listened to rock and metal music. All the details came out shortly thereafter. He was with his new girlfriend, sitting near the football field, when they were approached by a man with a gun. He was 6 feet 4 inches, 220 pounds of muscle, and my ex is 5 feet 11, 170 pounds, so a fair bit smaller. Anyway, he points the gun at them and demands all their money. They gave him all the cash they had and some other things, but it wasn't enough and he became angry. He stuck the gun in the girl's mouth and threatened to blow her brains out if he didn't get more from them. That's when my ex pulled out a switchblade, stabbed him once in the chest, and he and his girlfriend ran away. Once off school grounds, and with no sign of the man who tried to mug them, they called the cops immediately. The man died on the scene. The man had just gotten out of juvenile detention. I read that it wasn't even a real gun. The event has severely fucked up my ex mentally. He was called a racist and a murderer, even though he was just trying to save his girlfriend. He's now taking all kinds of drugs, can't get a job, and last I heard, is homeless. It's all very sad. Edit. Doubter prompted me to look up the old articles. I misremembered a few things and have some to add. The man was drunk and high on marijuana, had spent the whole day drinking and smoking. The man had a fresh gang tattoo. My ex and the girl gave him $10 and an iPod. Man started counting down from 10, threatening to kill the girl if he didn't get more by the time he finished counting. At this point is when my ex went into his bag and took out the knife. My ex stabbed him in the ribs, which caused the man to back off, but he still had a gun pointed at them, so they ran. He collapsed shortly after and was found by someone walking. My ex and the girl he was with took a cab and fled to his house before calling the cops. It was all caught on camera, so authorities knew the whole story early on and said that my ex's actions were found to be proportionate to the perceived harm. I had the weights wrong. X was 5'11 inches 140 pounds. The guy he stabbed was 6'2 inches 170 pounds, still muscular and much bigger. He was originally charged with manslaughter, but all charges were withdrawn. Not self-defense, but I was working in landscaping a few years ago putting some steel edging around giant flower beds. All was normal until my coworker, who I won't name, looked up and yelled "Hey!" very loudly out of nowhere. I thought it was just a joke or something at first, but raised my head to see a black dude going for a circular saw on my flatbed trailer. It was a $2,500 piece of equipment, so naturally I got up and ran after the guy with my freshly sharpened spade shovel with my heavy-set co-worker close behind relatively. Well, as soon as I got in range I threw my shovel as hard as I could, like a throwing axe, with 2 hands over my head while running at full speed with a sudden stop, so you can imagine the amount force behind it as it glided through the air. It hit him directly in the back of the head with the sound of metal hitting cement, except it was his skull. He dropped to the ground instantly. I thought I had just knocked him out, so we called the police and they arrived shortly after. After about 10 minutes and an ambulance showing up, they informed me that he wasn't knocked out. He was dead. I was transported to jail and spent 12 days there before seeing a judge and being released. I don't remember much of what happened legality-wise because I was so concerned about going to prison or something, but I do know my co-workers came and gave their stories, and that if the guy's family wanted to bring up a civil case then I would be forced to testify and whatnot. That never happened. My boss told me that he was a wanted man and all this crap, but I'm pretty sure he was just trying to put my mind at bay. And X200B, TL, Dr. Dude tried to steal stuff. I threw a shovel at him and killed him, and it was expunged from my record. I worked for a bar and I would usually go with the closing manager to the bank to drop off the money bag after closing. This usually happened around 4-5 a.m. At the time I owned a gun and wore it when we went to drop off the money. One night I follow her over to the bank and she gets out to go to the night drop box and a guy runs up on her. He has a big knife. I get out of my car and point my gun at him and tell him to go the fuck away. He starts running straight at me. Every bit of training I ever thought I had totally left me at that moment. I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. He goes down howling in pain with a big hole in his thigh. The bar manager dials 911 and starts shouting into the phone. I run over and kick the knife away to where this guy can't reach it. It's just general mayhem for a couple of minutes. A police officer driving by sees me holding a gun on a guy that is laying on the ground and he comes flying over the curb. Lights and siren going full blast. Between the two of us we tell the officer what happened. He sees how full of adrenaline I am and gets the gun from me very calmly. An ambulance shows up and takes the robber away. I am ready to get arrested but I don't. They ask me to come answer some questions. So we go downtown and I sit and talk to two different guys and tell them the story. The manager sits and tells them the story and then they give us both rides back to our cars. No charges were pressed on me. I testified against the guy I shot and he went to prison. He had quite a history of doing bad things. His family filed civil lawsuits against both me and the bar I work for. I got fired from my job but the lawsuit against me got thrown out, as did the lawsuit against the bar. Was being followed driving on my way home from work by a crazy ex-girlfriend's crazy partner. This wasn't the first time. I got home and opened the garage. Was supposed to put my car in the garage and let our home security do the work, but panicky rage took over and I grabbed a crowbar off the wall. Crazy man got out his car and lunged at me. I beat him with the crowbar in his legs and ribs, dropped the bar and proceeded to pummel him. He crawled to his vehicle, drove off. I called the cops. Dude told the cops I hit him in the head with the bar, but had a handful of broken ribs and a cut and bruised face. He called the cops too and as he came off worse they arrested me and questioned me. They realized something was up when they realized I'd called the cops on him previously for criminal damage and harassment etc. They knew what went on but I guess they understood what had been happening and the investigator gave me some very valuable advice that day, and didn't want me to start my adult life off in the wrong way. Wannabe mugger pretty much made a 90-degree turn into my back trail while I was walking to the library from the bus transit center after I passed him. He was significantly taller and heavier than me, so the fact I turned my head around and put eyes on him didn't stop him from accelerating and giving it a rip and go, like it typically does when you're no longer the path of least resistance when they are made aware that you're aware of them. He didn't notice I had 16-pound-a-piece reinforced work boots on. And I heard something tear down low in him when I kicked back into his knee while he was oncoming. He certainly dropped over, then scurried back up and hurriedly half limp, half ran off like I had did some lasting damage with the hidden steel. I didn't call the cops. He'd had enough. It was the kind of neighborhood where these things happen, anyways. Cops typically just write a report for anything less than maiming or murder and carry on. I told the librarian about it, and he just nodded and said he didn't leave the library without being in a group. Same place. A couple of days ago, I saw a homeless dude that looked like he was frothing at the mouth, like he was rabid, going up to find a place to get warm and do whatever homeless people do there. Downtown library. This isn't the worst shithole in America. It's actually quite nice for a large city. Sorta puts things in perspective. Oh bloody hell, Mara. Your story just reminded me of the night a few pals and I went out for grub at the bigger city near to mine. One of the best places to get a burger was this place adjoined to the train station, so very convenient for a quick afternoon out. There was some construction going on at the train station, so there were plenty of brickies and chippies to be found. Some bloke was pissed off his face, and I do mean shit-faced, and started hounding one of these brickies before he tried to snatch something off the brickie. The brickie had on these giant work boots that we could see were solidly built. One of those work boots went between the drunk's legs. We heard this odd sound that reminded me of a rather loud drop of water. It wasn't a pop, but more of a blip. The brickie shrugged and went back to his job like naught happened. The drunk went down and he wasn't moving. I remember thinking to myself I've never seen anyone die from being booted in the lads. Anyway, my pals and I are all first aiders so I call the ambulance as my disability meant I'd be a hindrance more than a help, and my pals went off to play Florence's Nightingale. They said his pupils were blown wide open, that he was just lying corpse still and breathing shallow. Ambulance arrived and one of my pals went with the drunk to the hospital. My pal called the rest of us a few hours later and the drunk endured a full-on ruptured testicle after the brickie's boot crushed it against the drunk's pelvis. I'm no bloke, but that made me shrivel up and die a little inside. This happened a few years back after I moved to a new city in the US, Illinois, and is a city that has a bad reputation for having some rough parts. I'll let you guess which one. I went out with some friends in what is typically a safe portion of the town and we were out drinking at a local bar. When we were leaving the bar, a less than upstanding individual approached us and demanded phones and wallets while brandishing a rather small flip blade This person was obviously not from this neighborhood and had traveled up there with the clear intention of working over some 20-somethings for easy cash. Naturally there's 3 of us, intoxicated and hopped up on 24-year-old hormones and other assorted fun things, so my one friend pulls the "Olay fuck you racial slur you ain't getting shit" and takes a swing at the would-be mugger. Well, he misses and the guy takes a swipe at him with the knife and cuts his arm pretty good. The second friend pulls out his phone and starts dialing 911 while screaming hysterically, not his proudest moment, and the man turns to me with the knife. What did I do? Naturally the first thing that came to mind, I kicked him square in the nuts. This sent him down to one knee as any well-placed drunken kick to the Olay chest of jewels would do, and the first friend at this point had recovered enough to land a good right hook across the guy's jaw. Him and I then proceeded to punch and kick the ever-loving snot out of this guy, probably only a half dozen good shots if we are being honest, until he managed to push us off of him and stagger our into the street where a police cruiser just happened to be in the area and responding to the friend's 911 call. We messed the guy up pretty good, but as he had a knife and other patrons in the bar had witnessed what happened, the police were not too terribly upset with a bloody mess of mugger on their hands at our doing. Looking back, it's kind of lame and not as cool as other people's experiences, but hey, it felt good to beat the piss out of some asshole who decided we would be good targets. Woke up in the middle of the night to my dogs barking. Looked out the window and saw someone breaking into my vehicle. I ran out in socks and shorts and confronted the man. Told him to phone that I was calling the police. He said he just got out of jail and he would crack me if I called the cops. He inched closer. I stood my ground. I did wrestling in high school, boxing and jiu-jitsu during college, so I was somewhat prepared. His breath smelled like alcohol and bad decisions. I knocked him down easily with a 1-2. Got on top and started to ground and pound, followed by a couple knees. There was blood everywhere and all over me. I held him down while my GF called the cops and they arrived about 5 minutes later. They rushed him to the hospital with serious injuries and took me in to question me all night. I was released and that was the end of that. Apparently he had about 15 prior break-ins, assaults. Looking back, he could have been armed and I should have just called police and let them handle it. Not a human being, but when I was 12-year-old I accidentally killed our family's parrot in self-defense. Our parrot didn't like anyone except our dad. One morning when I was making myself ready for school, our parrot had escaped its cage and flew towards me to attack. Before its second attempt to attack me, I ran towards the door of the room, thinking that I need to close this door and trap the parrot in the room. I had just managed to get to the door when the parrot's next attack was incoming. I hurried to close the door and bam! I smashed the poor bird with the door. He felt on his back and I started to fear that I might have killed him. I gave my mom a call saying that I believe I killed our parrot. I then hurried to school, already being late. What happened next? Did your dad beat you with jumper cables in a fit of parrot death-induced rage? Not a death and arguable for self-defense. Definitely not a death, but when I was younger, 13 or 14, playing baseball, I had a massive collision at home plate. I was trying to score from third on a passed ball. Errant throw down the line from the catcher, and I ended up burying the back of my helmet into the back of the skull of the pitcher. My helmet visor broke off and somewhat scalped the pitcher. After a ridiculous collision, my body ended up on top of home plate. I was incoherent at the time and remember a little about being helped back to the dugout. Anyway, the guy had to have over 50 stitches staples. Apparently, he was some sort of prodigy pitcher and I fucked up his future. For the next 3 years, my family and I were stalked at every game by multiple people. One person even came to our home. He was met with a gun, so he decided to leave. It even transferred over to my high school career. I can go on, but it's not worth the time. Pre-edit, if that's a thing. There was absolutely no slide rule at this time. Regardless, the ball was thrown nearly 15 feet down the third baseline. A collision was inevitable. As a result of this bullshit, I was often using fake names and numbers in multiple tournaments. My parents now carried everywhere in our county, and often carried outside of the county. It was as though I hurt baby Jesus. In doubleheaders, I often had to switch jerseys and names to try to alleviate the bullshit, even if I had to pitch both games. No, there were no pitching rules at the time. I pitched 34 games in a row. Long story short, eat it John. You weren't that good. Does war count? In 2009 I was deployed to Afghanland. I was a machine gunner in an infantry squad conducting foot patrols all over South Afghan. Fighting and killing in war is confusing as shit. It is hard to know if and when you killed someone. Imagine if you and your 13 squad mates are banging around and 3 guys open up with AKs at you. All 13 of return fire and 3 guys 200 meters away are dead. Who killed who? That's a simple one. Imagine the same with urban environments, 40mm grenades, and moving targets. Your squad can be responsible for lots of kills, but it's tough to say who did what. Well, I do know I killed at least one person. We used to go into this village every day and we knew we'd get into a fight. In this part of Afghan there is no real roads, and if you got into the shit you were by yourself until a squad on foot could get to you. What about air? Well, this was early in Obama's first term and heavy machine guns and up required all sorts of shit permission to use. Getting approved for RT and air wasn't going to happen. Additionally, we were neutered. My job calls for a medium machine gun, but there wasn't enough, so I was toting a light machine, an M249 saw. We had 40mm grenades but were not allowed to take hand grenades. So we approach this village and we have 200 yards of clear fields to get through. It's an area ripe for an ambush. They hit us like they always did and we bounded by fire team forward. War is confusing as hell, so even when you think you know where the fire is coming from, it can be confusing. Spider holes, windows and small alleys are home to hidden AKs. As we fought towards the town, my team hit the town first. As we approached we got lit up from everywhere. Complete chaos. We run towards the nearest compound to get cover. We are moving west and getting fired on from a valley to our northwest. First guy hits the wall and starts returning fire. I'm third in the squad team with the corpsman behind me and team leader ahead of me. He's loading a 40mm to deal with the alley asshole when he gets fired one from the compound he's running towards. The fire is coming from an outbuildings with a small spider hole. He sprints past it and is now on the same plane as the shooter, so he's safe. I'm at a dead sprint behind him when he screams at me and Doc to clear the building. Conventional wisdom says the open bolt machine gun shouldn't make entry, but conventional wisdom never met Murphy. These compounds are made of mud and the doors are a one-piece door and frame made from cheap metal. I slam into it with all 6 feet 4 and 220 pounds plus gun armor and ammo of me. The room is as big as a standard bathroom. Homie with the kalash is firing from the hip through a hole about waist height. He turns to see me and pulls his barrel out of the hole. By this time I've pulled the trigger and hoped for the best. The M249 is a squirt gun and at that range I didn't need to aim. I hit him over a dozen times from his stomach to neck. People don't dance when they hit by an MG, they just kinda fall over. Doc made entry made 2 seconds behind me. He did a dead check and we moved on and kept fighting. Did it change me? IDK, how much introspection does a 19-year at war have? I didn't get a lot of time to think about it because war goes on. Do I feel guilty now? No, we both woke up that morning and picked up guns instead of plows, so we both made a choice. I just got a little luckier. I remember reading a story on a similar thread a while back about a guy who killed a guy that was raping his wife in his house. He didn't hear the attacker break in because he was upstairs gaming and had his headphones on. When he did finally figure out something was going on, he made his way downstairs with his gun, totally surprised the rapist, and shot him twice, killing him. If I'm remembering correctly, he described how it was considered to charge him with murder because he shot twice. It was determined that since the first shot killed him, the second was irrelevant, or some kind of complete nonsense to that effect. This story has haunted me since I read it. Myself and 2 of my friends park at a big party town by the bars, Iowa City. We get out and see this girl down the street slapping and punching this guy, I would assume her boyfriend. My friends have big mouths and start yelling shit and I stand there laughing. Also, one friend is very skinny, the other is overweight and I was pretty jacked. She storms up the street and picks me, walks up to me, punches me in the mouth and then the crotch. Was not drinking yet but had no memory of what happened. I saw black and when I opened my eyes she was on the ground halfway across the street. My friends told me I said you fucking cunt and launched her. Strange because that word is hardly in my vocabulary. I wouldn't consciously hit a woman or anything like that. Even if she hit me, it was so crazy that I just saw black. I have been hit by men before but that little girl punched hard. My so beat up a kid so bad that he almost killed him. They were the same age. My so was 14, and his mother had just died by OD. His sister got to live with her dad, but my so didn't have a dad or anyone to stay with. His grandma and uncle eventually was settled with him. Important. So was like 90 pounds soaking wet. Scrawny. His voice hasn't deepened yet. Anyway. This kid was sort of the last straw for so. His mom died, his sister left and her dad didn't want him, and his people only reluctantly took him in and this kid was harassing my so to the point that he hit the kid. Only, he kept hitting him. And slamming his head down. The cuffs fell off his wrists when he stood before the judge. He wasn't even comprehending just how much trouble he was in. He's told me he thought it was all going to blow over with some minor punishment, not that he was in legal trouble. The judge talks to him privately, says he understood that he's just a kid and would never normally do something like this, but that he still had to be punished. He was sent to boot camp. I don't remember for how long. He's never been violent before or since. He's a great and loving father to his son, dotes on him even if it means daddy goes hungry. He's the smartest man I know. He's kind. He is my life. And he'd never hurt anyone. Back in the early 90s there were a lot of break-ins in my neighborhood in the suburbs of Dallas, so I decided to buy a gun. I'm a single dad. Wife passed away when my kids were young, and I wasn't home a lot so they were mostly just them and a babysitter at the house when I was working late most of the time, which made me nervous. I'm pretty anti-gun and still am to this day, which I know isn't exactly a popular opinion to have in my area, but I can't dispute the fact that decision saved my life and the lives of my children. A guy broke into our home in the early afternoon one weekday while I was home early with my kids. He came in the patio back door which was unlocked, with a large hunting knife, a backpack, and rope. I was upstairs in my home office doing work, when I heard my daughter in the living room screaming, "Daddy, there's a man in the house." I heard him yelling at her and made out him yelling, "Shut up." I grabbed my gun out of the safe, ran downstairs, and found a man dressed in black holding a knife, standing in my living room yelling at my kids to get down on the floor. I put 4 in his torso, and another 2 when he was down on the ground to make sure he was dead. I told me kids to go to the bathroom and lock the door, called the police, and they were at my house in less than 5 minutes. Turns out the DNA test on the body connected him to a string of other robberies and some unsolved B&D rapes over the past few years in the area. We moved out of that house a few years later, and relocated to Houston for my job, where I work as a geologist for an oil and gas company, which was for the best because after that my kids were traumatized off sleeping in that house. They stayed at my sister's place for about a month after the incident, until they were ready to come back home, and were happy to move to a new town, even though they still miss their old friends back home.